Um, sorry, just some technical difficulties here. Okay, so this.
Not wearing PPE at self scans.
Yeah, that's working now, I think. So is that working okay? Let's wait for someone to give us the okay, and we'll continue. No sound at all.
Okay. Back on? Don't know. Real bad sound. Check your mic. We can hear you slurping.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Sorry about that. It's like being trapped in an aquarium or something and just tapping on the glass. All right, so we might start from the start. And if we ever release this as a full edition, we'll just scrap everything that's come from here. So welcome. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for sticking through 10 minutes of no sound. This is the most dedicated watchers for socialist analysis in relation to the coronavirus crisis who are now with us. That was just a kind of a filtering process. So the idea of this online meeting is to focus on the issue of workers' rights, entitlements and workers' struggle during Covid-19. We've got a list of a whole series of different interviews with workers' leaders lined up, and then at the end we've got a live interview with Eddie Conlon, who is a trade union coordinator for People Before Profit. They're launching a hotline. I think they've launched a hotline for workers to ask questions that are coming up. I mean, I'm being inundated with questions. Just to introduce people again to my co-host and partner, so explain why we're not socially distant, Jess Spear. Some of the people we'll be talking to will be Rob Kelly, who is an organiser with Unite. The union was centrally involved in helping the construction branch to expose some of the horrendous practices of the construction companies like BAM at the National Children's Hospital trying to stay open in the last last couple of days, despite the fact that it's simply not possible to have socially distancing going on building sites. And we're speaking to Helen O'Connor, who's an organiser with GMB, a union in Britain, which organises workers right throughout the NHS about the conditions in the NHS, about the fights that they have for personal protective equipment in particular. Before we get to any of the interviews, I think we're going to go through some of the news about the coronavirus crisis that you may not have heard on RTE today.
Yeah, there's two really important news stories that have come out within the last few days. The first is over Amazon warehouse workers in the US, in New York, going on strike in order to firstly make sure that they have the type of personal protection equipment that they need to make sure that they're not spreading the virus around the warehouse. In fact, there have been a number of Amazon warehouses in which workers have contracted the virus, and because they're in such close proximity to each other, it has spread a bit, and so these workers were concerned about that, and so they were demanding personal protection equipment and personal protection equipment that actually would be what they need. So some of them have been saying they would get a face mask, but they would have to use the same face mask over a number of days rather than getting a new one every day. So that was their main demand. But then they also are for that. So I think that is a really important story. And I think...
I mean, one of the things I saw was that the worker, I think the leader of the strikers was effectively laid off or fired
they fired him.
by Amazon. And I saw that what they said was the reason they fired him was because he wasn't socially distant from people. He hadn't paid attention to the various guidances. Is that right?
Yeah, they said that he had been in contact with one of the workers that had gotten the virus and that he was told to socially isolate for 14 days. And because he had come back to work, they used that as a reason to fire him. But it's very obvious if you look at the situation that they were using it as an excuse, using any excuse really to fire a worker leader, somebody that was standing up for the rest of the workers to ensure that they got what they needed and that they could be protected. And this just reminds me of the situation a few weeks ago with the on-post workers going on strike in Dublin 15 and for the hand sanitizer, and they got that. So it is really important that workers stand up collectively for what they need to ensure that they're protected.
I think we have this article coming up online now shortly. Just need to click through it because there's a number of videos and stuff. We just need to transition to it now. If we can just do that there. You can see the Amazon workers walk out over lack of protective gear. If we can just scroll down now, let me see if we can. hang on a second, because there's some good videos at the end. There we go. I'll show you. So there's this guy Chris Smalls, who was the lead organizer. He's quoted as saying that since the building won't close by itself, we're going to have to force their hand. He added that workers will not return until the building gets sanitized. And then there's a picture of the walkout here. It's on the Guardian website. So you can see they're socially distant, like you're saying there. All right.
Yeah, the other story that I think is really important is, so I think most of us would be aware that there is a critical shortage of ventilators, and ventilators are something that doctors would use or nurses would use to help people breathe, basically. And it's a respiratory virus. A lot of people that are in the ICU need these ventilators so that they can stay alive, but there is a shortage of them. And in a workplace in Massachusetts, General Electric workers, who actually normally build and test plane engines, are saying that they need to repurpose and to retool these factories so that they can build the ventilators. They're saying, look, GE already builds these ventilators in other factories, so it can be done in this factory. So they also did a protest where, again, they socially distanced, they walked out 6 feet apart from each other to protest and say GE should do this. And the other part of the story that's really fascinating is that GE is going to be announcing a 10% layoff of workers in the aviation industry. These very workers who are saying, look, if you retool this factory, we're going to be able to make the ventilators that are obviously in a big need at the moment.
And what's the answer of General Electric to the demand of the workers so far?
They're saying basically we're making the ventilators already in our other factories, and they're not bending to those demands whatsoever. But I think if anybody is following the news stories from all across
industry, workers directing things in the likes of General Electric, in the likes of the pharmaceutical companies, well then actually it's clear that these workers would place the interest of people first as opposed to the profit of private companies.
Yeah, I mean, as a socialist, it's not too surprising that workers would decide to support other workers, to put public health before private profits, but it is a really good example of it, that they're actually going out and protesting over this.
Excellent. So if you're just joining us, some people saying sound is gone. This time it's showing up on our screen, which is good.
Oh, they can't hear.
Oh, because of the page.
Okay.
So I think there's a technical issue we can resolve there.
We won't be putting up any more pages.
That's true. That's our last page.
Sound and picture gone now.
Okay, sound is back again. Thanks a lot. This is the kind of live feedback that we need. So thanks a lot if you're just joining us now. This is a discussion in particular about workers' rights, workers' entitlements and struggles at the time of COVID-19. In maybe 5 or 10 minutes, we'll have a question and answer session with Eddie Conlon, who is a trade union coordinator with People for Profit. First, I just want to show a clip of a recent interview I recorded yesterday with Rob Kelly. Yeah. Rob is an organizer with Unite trade union. He's been working in the construction branch of Unite and has been involved. People will have seen online the hashtag shut the sites, highlighting over the last week actually well before the government shut the non-essential work, they've been calling for the suspension of all construction sites. And this reached a head after Friday when, under pressure, the Taoiseach announced, okay, we're shutting down all non-essential work. On Saturday night, then the full kind of details of that about who has to shut down came out. Then it looked as if BAM, which is the main contractor on the National Children's Hospital site, were going to shut their sites there and at Intel. But then on Sunday night, they basically sent a message out to people and a letter out to people saying we have to go ahead. We're essential. They claimed that they were allowed to continue. And so there was quite a social media campaign then yesterday about it. So I spoke to Rob about it. I'll just play the video now.
We started getting a stream of photographs and videos in from building sites last week, showing the conditions that workers were still being forced to work in. And it just became obvious that sites needed to shut down as soon as possible. And so then last Friday night, the Taoiseach made his announcement, and we were like, okay, great stuff. And so we kind of firefighting all over the weekend. And then today, we're getting reports in from one of the biggest construction sites in the country, the National Children's Hospital, that it's full flow there. We got, letters and documentation to show that they're in there pouring concrete, continuing with production on the site. It's clear from the letter from the director of the project from BAM that they intend to keep the place open. And it's frightening because, you have a lot of construction workers that are stuck at home and doing the right thing, and yet looking around and going, well, that site's still open. Why is that site still open? And my site is closed? And they're setting a really bad example to all citizens. We have a moral responsibility to stay at home, do what we're told, and the sooner that we do that, the quicker this virus will pass us by, and the quicker we can get back to normal. If companies like BAM are going to continue to operate with hundreds of people on the site today, and this is going to kill more people, and this is going to go on for longer than it needs to. And so we're calling on BAM to shut the site, lock it up as you're told, send your workers home, and open up when it is safe to do so. This pandemic passes us by.
Okay, we're back. The full interview that I did with Rob, which contains a number of other points, we'll put up on our Facebook page in the next day or so people can look out for that. But I think that gives a very good example of how, these companies, the only thing they were thinking about was their profit, and they were willing to put workers' lives and health in danger to maximize their profit.
Yeah, and I think they underestimated what workers would do in response, about how they would do everything they could to protect themselves and their families, to contact their local TDs, their local councillors, but also go to the media, to contact the union first and foremost and see what kind of campaign they could get going to get it shut down. And the fact that they did that is the reason why it was shut down.
Yeah, that was exactly that. Today we got confirmation. I got a call from a worker I know today saying that it looked like it was being shut down. Rob was in touch saying they also heard it was being shut down. And then this evening, BAM released a statement saying that basically it's being shut down. They said, there was some lack of clarity on whether they were essential or non-essential, and they got clarity from the minister, and that's why they now shut down. But it's so obvious that they shut down because of the pressure. And that's the second example in just a number of days whereby companies have been highlighted, have been the subject of social media campaigns and so on, and have been forced to back down. On Saturday morning, we found out that the NCT centres were due to reopen on the Sunday. We started an online campaign about it, and 3 or 4 hours later, then the NCT announced that they weren't going to be reopening. Even though still on the website they were still saying they were being reopening because the pressure came to bear. And I think it really underlines the point about workers getting organised into trade unions, workers fighting for their rights. At all times, it's a point Rob made to me, at all times that's relevant, but particularly relevant now. And kind of failing that, or in addition to that, having the likes of social media campaigns contacting us and getting us to highlight these things can make a real difference.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And we might move on and just have the interview with Helen, who is an organizer with GMB, which organizes NHS workers from porters, cleaners, nurses in the British National Health Service. And I was talking to her about what's happening there and their struggles in particular around PPE, personal protective equipment.
Well, speaking specifically about the NHS, I can tell you that it has been under siege for many, many years by a program of cutbacks and privatization. So we're now faced with a situation where these structures of the NHS are not fit for purpose. And now we're in a pandemic where we need increased capacity and increased staffing, increased equipment very, very quickly. So we have a lack of staff at the moment, at the best of times, a lack of beds and a lack of equipment. We also have the outsourced workers who generally tend to be the cleaners, the porters and the caterers who have been treated very, very badly for a very long time. Many of them are on the minimum wage, which isn't even enough to feed their families or pay their bills. We've been fighting for a very long time to try and get the pay parity between the outsourced workers and the NHS workers. We've been fighting for sick pay as well from day one for a very long time, because these workers don't even get sick pay, which we think is a cross-infection risk actually in a hospital, because what happens is they go into work when they're sick themselves and spread infection, which is highly dangerous for the public. There's a personal protective equipment shortage. So people, particularly the outsourced workers, but I know it's happening with the nurses and the doctors as well, the PPE is either not there or it's not fit for purpose. So the outsourced workers are finding themselves last in the queue to get anything. The basic level of PPE is mask, plastic apron and gloves. That's the basic level. Up to a week ago, we had people not even getting that, the very basic. We think that a much higher level of PPE is required. There's also a lack of testing. So again, a lot of health workers are going into the unknown with patients. They don't know whether they have it or not.
Okay, that was just a clip from the interview that we did with Helen there. The full interview we'll have online, so people can view all the things that she covers there about personal protection equipment and the need for it, the dire need for it for our frontline healthcare staff. I mean, it was something like 25% of the cases from a few days ago were of healthcare workers themselves. I mean, these are the people that we absolutely need on the front line, and we need to make sure they're protected. I know that they had a plane coming from China with a huge amount of personal protection equipment, but it's obvious whenever you're reading the online statements from nurses or when you're talking to people like Helen, there isn't the type of organization and distribution that is absolutely necessary to protect our healthcare staff, and we encourage them to continue to speak out and to point out the gaps that exist there.
Absolutely. I mean, like I saw that the French government actually effectively requisitioned all personal protective equipment within France to distribute it to the staff who need it. And that's what we think, the logic of profit, the logic of distribution of these essential goods via the market should be broken with to ensure that we, prioritize those who need it, those who are on the front line, the health staff, getting the personal protective equipment that they need. And then for the excess equipment, making sure that there's price controls on them. I mean, I got another story just today, something outrageous. A pharmacy was selling basically a package of like a couple of face masks and some hand sanitizer for something like €50, something really outrageous. So that's still going on. I mean, Simon Harris came out and said the other day that price gouging, profiteering will be punished. There's a special place in hell, I think he said, but they haven't bothered to introduce not even the legislation. A ministerial order is all they need to outlaw price gouging, to implement price controls, and they've failed to do it.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about putting capitalism to rest, right? Like just setting her down and waiting to wake her up for when you need her. But there's still loads of capitalism existing all around us. And that's for the price gouging. It's where you see the inefficiencies of the market with the General Electric plants not being used and refitted to make ventilators. Like it really points to the need for socialist policies to really come to the fore in a complete way and not just in a half-hearted way. And I think you're not going to see that unless you have more workers standing up and saying, hey, look, like we know production and we know distribution better than you do. And that's why you're having the government come out with like half measures, and then the workers themselves are coming back and saying, hey, you didn't think about this, you didn't think about that. And these are the measures that you need to take, and that's why we encourage workers to continue to come forward and say those things, because it isn't surprising to us that the government is not able to actually plan and ensure that we have everything that we need. We think it's good that they're taking the steps that they are taking, and that can ensure that less people get sick and less people are really harmed by this. But it's not surprising to me that it's incredibly inefficient.
It's like, even in relation to the hospitals, I mean, it was the left that was out first to say that we shouldn't have a situation where the public hospitals are under strain from the coronavirus and there's empty beds in the private hospitals. We need to take the private hospital facilities, bring them into the public system. And we were saying that during the election, we were saying it in advance of the crisis.
Yep.
Then the government has done that in a certain sense, but like you say, it's in a half-hearted way. They made a big point at a press conference, I think yesterday, of saying this is not nationalisation of the private hospitals. It's the equivalent of a public-private partnership model, i.e. they're paying the private hospitals. The private hospitals and the owners of the private hospitals are going to make profit out of this situation, or they're going to certainly try to, as opposed to, we would say simply, take over the private hospitals, nationalise the private hospitals, bring them into the public system. You should have an equality of access to treatment at all times. We should not be rationing access to healthcare based on wealth at all times other than a pandemic. If it's not okay to do it in a pandemic, if it's not okay to have a higher chance of survival during a pandemic, well then why is it okay to have a higher chance of dying of cancer or whatever outside of a pandemic?
Yeah, and it also doesn't make any sense whenever you've built up a certain single-tier system to then unwind that, give the private hospitals and beds and all of that back over to private hands, and like you're saying, and deny people the access to the healthcare that they need at all times.
The other issue that just come in that doesn't directly relate to Eddie, who's our next guest, is just a number of people are asking a question which came up a lot about AIB today, and we were inundated by people contacting us basically saying that, like, you know, hundreds of thousands of people have been made unemployed over the past couple of weeks. It's just, the numbers have shot through the roof, and then at this time AIB has taken the €100, which seems to be for some people quarterly charges, out of people's bank accounts, which is outrageous at a time that they can't afford it. And it just shows the logic of, again, running the banks. We think the banks should be a public utility. We should use them. You know, the banks should be run for society, not society and the economy run for the banks. It's utter madness. But again, I'd say to people, at least one person contacted me and said they contacted the banks said, oh, we're very sorry, we'll refund the money, etc. I think, again, like we forced them back on the charge for the contactless card, they can be forced back on the fees as well. If the public pressure builds, they're all nervous about being seen very blatantly for their private profit interests to stand in the way of doing what's necessary for public health.
Yeah, and I mean, the government owns the majority share of AIB, so the government absolutely can step in and say, hey, look, we own you, don't do this, don't force any fees on anybody. But again, they step aside from that and don't want to be seen to place any type of restriction or regulation on the banks and kind of hope that they do what is right. And only belatedly say, oh, well, you know, maybe they shouldn't do that, or talk about a special place in hell, whenever it's the logic of the system itself that they themselves are promoters of.
I agree. Okay, we might move on to our final part then, which is an interview with Eddie Conlon, who is, like I said, an organizer, coordinator of the trade union work of People Before Profit, and they've launched a phone line recently. So we'll bring Eddie up here. That's okay. Okay, you're
Add some lemon juice.
What?
Okay.
Should we test
Try now.
Hello, do you want me to speak?
Yeah, let's. You speak there, and I'll just see if the audio thing is showing up here.
Okay, should I just say a few things to get
Well,
started?
hang on a second, because if no one can hear you, then I think. So when Eddie talks, it does. It looks as if we're getting sound. We're just waiting for confirmation from some public. Okay, yes, we have sound. So thanks a million, Eddie, for joining us. You're still frozen your picture, but we'll take you with sound anyway. That's no harm. Maybe the first question is just, look, a lot of workers are in a situation at the moment where they've been made unemployed, or they've been kind of sent home from work at this time while the coronavirus is continuing. What's workers' rights in this situation? What are they entitled to, and what should they do to access it?
Well, very simply, people who are temporarily laid off should apply for the COVID-19 pandemic unemployment payment. I'm told it's relatively easy to do. You can apply online. You have to be between 18 and 66. And I think that's what most people are going to end up on. It's 350 a week. And the funny situation is beginning to emerge. There is also a subsidy scheme for employers who keep workers on. But that provides for 70% of your net income, up to a net salary of €586. But we're being told that a lot of workers, initially we're pushing the employer to go into the job subsidy scheme. They're actually better off on the 350, which is just reflective of the extent of low pay across the economy. So, for example, I had some language teachers on to me today who are collectively pushing the employer, and then when they sat down and worked it out, they realised, hang on, we're better off on the 350. And that's what they've done. But there seems to be problems, even in cases where workers want to go on the job subsidy scheme, the employer seems quite reluctant to do so. And so a lot of workers have been put on temporary layoff.
And I was contacted by one worker who was asking about, they were being put on short working time. Is there any scheme available for workers like that if they go from a 40-hour week to a 20-hour week or a 10-hour week or whatever?
That is probably the worst situation to be in this crisis. Well, it depends obviously on what people are earning, right? But if you go put on short time, you don't qualify for any of these special payments. If you're working for less than 3 days a week, you just have to apply, as a short-time worker to get traditional job seekers allowance for the portion of the week that you're not working, and it's paid at the level prior to the crisis, which is about €203 a week, I think. So the situation for people put on short time is not very good, actually, given the payments that have been paid to people who have been put on temporary layoff. We have seen situations. There was a situation last week with mandates in Sports Direct, I think, where a lot of part-timers have been kept on small numbers of hours, which was actually disadvantaged them in a major way.
And how long do workers get the pandemic unemployment payment for, and what happens at the end of that period of time?
Well, as far as I understand this, they get it for the duration of the pandemic. There used to be a degree of uncertainty in all of this, as you will know, that we don't know how long it's going to go on for, and we're not sure, for how many weeks. we'll be officially in this pandemic, you know. So there's an issue there of how long it's going to go on to. I mean, the initial, the issue will be, obviously, when the crisis is over, that workers will be expected, if they're not taken back into work, which obviously sets up a whole lot of issues, right? Because some workers are very concerned that they're not going to be taken back, and they're also concerned about the basis on which workers are going to be taken back. And it's a sort of complicated situation because, as far as we understand this, temporary layoff does not break your contract of employment with the employer, right? In normal situations, if you're on temporary layoff for 4 weeks, or a number of weeks in a 13-week period, you can apply for redundancy. But the redundancy provisions have been suspended, as you know, for the period of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So our assumption will be is when the crisis ends, most people go back to work, and there may be a fight there. Let's be clear about that. But then the unemployment benefit, the job seekers allowance, will revert back to the normal rate.
Yeah. Your video is back, by the way, Eddie, which people will be, the masses on Facebook are delighted to see your face move. It's great. Just one of the big questions we're getting, obviously it relates to some of the stuff we're talking about, is about the basically workers who are contacting us who are working, for example, in pharmaceutical labs, in like specialty food production, in different factories, and they're saying to us, look, we don't think that our job is an essential job. What can we do about it?
Okay, so this is a big issue too. So there's a number of layers to this issue. We think, and our advice is that most jobs are not essential in the current context, right? And therefore, workers should be arguing that they should stay at home. Now, unfortunately, some of the advice from some of the unions hasn't been that helpful in this context, but there is a sort of growing, and they have shifted their positions and so on. It's growing consensus that people should stay at home. That should be our starting position. It's the safest place to be. Workers travelling in and out to work and so on, as was an issue in the construction industry, poses a risk to workers. So, if workers are at work, and some places haven't closed, for example, I'm aware that Bosch and Lom in Waterford, which employs 900 workers, is still open.
Yeah, I've been contacted by a lot of those workers.
Pardon?
I've been contacted by a whole bunch of those workers now, yeah.
Okay, so they make contact lenses. That's not essential. Doesn't seem to be particularly essential. If all the opticians have closed, I suspect they're mainly making stuff for the export market. There is no reason why that factory should be open. That's a very large number of workers, akin to the number of workers on the Children's Hospital site. There are about 900 workers there. They shouldn't be at work. They should be at home. It's the safest place for them to be. So, and I think it's probably not possible to create a safe working environment in situations like that. So therefore, it's very clear on the health and safety legislation, you don't have to continue working in an unsafe place of work. So the workers are quite entitled to remove themselves from there and not suffer any retaliation in the law from the employer. So I believe Bosch and Lom is a unionised place. I think the members of SIP2, they should be told to go home.
Yeah.
And that's what we think the workers should be pushing for. And we're not just operating a helpline in the sense of just providing factual advice to people, although we want to do that. We're also trying to encourage workers to have these discussions with their mates, go back to their union and so on, and try and bring about some action to remove themselves from that situation.
Yeah.
Now, in jobs that are essential, obviously there is still a requirement to that the place of work be safe. There is no reason, and in fact it is absolutely detrimental to the current situation, that health workers, for example, would get the virus and have to be removed anyway from these from these workplaces where they're badly needed. interestingly, nurses and doctors in Zimbabwe have gone on strike because the government there won't provide them with appropriate PPE so that they can be protected in terms of treating the virus. And the crisis isn't as developed there at all. They've got other problems in Zimbabwe, but in relation to COVID-19, they're nothing like as far down the road as we are. But as regarded as this, and there's some debate about this, I'm told that Intel, for example, is still operating.
Correct, yeah.
On the basis of a provision in the government's very long list of essential services. That even when workers are situations regarded as essential, proper health and safety has to apply, and there has to be provision for social distancing. PPE needs to be provided, and so on. Now, it strikes me, I think the example you talked about from the States there about the workers demanding that the ventilation will be made, it's probably possible, I suspect, but not much imagination. And maybe Bosch and Long could be used to make other things in the context of the current crisis. They're making contact lenses, visors are necessary in this situation. I don't know the details of all this, but it strikes me that it wouldn't be beyond imagination that the productive capacity there could be used for something else, which might actually help with the current situation.
Yeah. And one of the questions that came in there is about safety of supermarket workers, that someone feels that this issue isn't being raised enough. I mean, we always try to emphasize that when we're talking about frontline workers, essential workers, we're definitely talking about healthcare staff, but we're also talking about supermarket workers, truck drivers, bin drivers, anyone who's involved in keeping the necessary things in society for all of us to continue to live, for health workers to get food, etc. What kind of demands are and should be raised by supermarket workers, and what can supermarket workers do to ensure that they're properly protected in their place of work?
Well, I think there's an argument that I'm not sure that all the food shops need to stay open. I think unnecessary risks are being taken in some cases the risk is being increased by the number of places that remain open. So around the corner from me here, there are 3 big shops, Tesco and Iceland, and one of those town shops, all beside each other. They're all open, and people could essentially get what they need from one of them, it seems to me. But the state obviously is not going to impose those kind of controls. But it seems to me there's something illogical about that situation. I think the workers in supermarkets need to absolutely ensure the social distancing, that they get the protective equipment that they need, that they have the opportunities to wash their hands, and that really, yes, you should wash your hands. Not the only thing you need to do. It's some of the only advice I think too is given to workers. But the other thing I think perhaps these workers should look for is for hazard pay. That they should be looking for additional payments because they are actually being put at risk.
Yeah, I saw Dunn's workers, Mandate put in a claim for hazard pay, and Dunn's workers were granted hazard pay.
I wasn't aware of that, but that's good.
Yeah.
But now that needs to be extended across all the other shops. But could I just make a general point about this? It strikes me there's something very interesting in a general sense about workers' rights in this, that they've now come to the top of the agenda. People are out talking about workers' rights in a way that they weren't even, just before this crisis, and even during the general election. People before profit tried to make it an issue in the election, didn't really get the resonance it should have. We also produced a pamphlet last year showing the paucity of workers' rights in this country in relation to when you compare Ireland, say, with other countries. And for example, a terrible sick pay regime where you had to be out for 6 days before you got at it was absolutely exposed by this crisis. So it strikes me this is a great opportunity. One doesn't like to speak in those terms about this, but given the situation that we're in. But it is an opportunity for unions to get in there and start actually organising people when they're open, listening to, and workers have a real need to be protected in these situations. But the unions need to get in there and start organising some of these people. And we need to make sure that the floor of workers' rights in this country is raised considerably as we move out of this crisis, and we don't allow us to revert back to the awful sick pay regime, for example, we had before it.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing now that you can have a system whereby you have, for example, where if you have a temporary layoff and people are guaranteed a large portion of their wages, based on a percentage of their previous income, which is akin to systems that you have, all year round in other European countries. You see what is potentially possible, but obviously we know after the crisis, definitely the government is going to try and take all this stuff back and more to pay for perhaps the 20 billion that they're saying the crisis is going to cost. Just one more question for you, Eddie, has come in, a question about someone who is an undocumented migrant who has lost their job as a consequence of the pandemic unemployment, as a consequence of the coronavirus, and they're worried about going to social welfare because of their immigration status. What should a person like that do you know?
Okay, well, it's interesting what's happened there. The Migrant Rights Centre have been on top of this, actually. They have met with the government and sought various commitments, which they've got, actually. So I'll just read this out, what they've agreed, just so I'm absolutely accurate about it. So they say that the Migrant Rights, the government has confirmed to the Migrant Rights Centre that all people, documented or undocumented, can apply for the hardship payments and access information from social welfare services free from fear during COVID-19. While they say you will need to get your PPS number and so on, it says social welfare services will not share information with the Department of Justice and Equality. Mm-hmm. So the Migrant Rights Centre seems quite confident, I think, that they have an understanding with the government here.
Okay.
That people can have their position protected without their status being brought into question.
Okay, great. Well, that should definitely would encourage then people in that situation to make the application and to be confident that they can rely on that commitment from the government, and good that the MRCI was doing that. Could you just, we probably will leave it there, Eddie. Could you give us a plug for your phone line if you know what the number is?
Don't worry, I know the number. But just to say, this is an initiative we've taken. We've been, and I'm sure you have been as well, inundated with people ringing and so on.
Yeah.
Trying to put a bit of structure around this. And criminally, actually, the unions aren't doing it. I can't see. We looked at all the various websites, the unions and so on. They're not actually offering any sort of service like this where people can ring and talk to them and so on. So we're running this just for the moment from 12 to 2 every day. The number is 01-211-8086. So it's been set up by people for profit, but obviously welcome calls from everybody. We are getting calls from everybody. We've been inundated in the first 2 days. So we're looking to put more resources into that, so we'll have more people on the lines and so on.
Can someone ring outside of those hours and leave a message and you'll come back to them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
There are other numbers for PVP and email addresses from our website and so on, and our Facebook page that people can contact. So the number again is 01-211-8086.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks a million, Eddie, for joining us, and
Thanks,
good luck. Bye bye. Let me try and. Okay. That was excellent. Maybe I'll also just mention that there's a Tala community support Facebook page set up to support people in the context of the coronavirus, and I know Barbara has recently got a hotline number for that, for people who want to ring. Also can ring with workers' questions or people who need assistance in terms of older people, vulnerable people who need to get shopping, something from the pharmacy or whatever. We'll be able to help them. I think you have that number.
Yeah, the number is 087-466-7146. And really, like, if anybody's even any questions to ask or, whatever, you can call Barbara. She's very happy to answer your question or point you in the right direction. Because I think in this time, really, it would be incumbent on all of us to get organized within our communities. There's a lot of resources out there, but also we can build up our own set of resources and begin to assist each other and getting the help that we need.
Okay, I think that's a wrap for this evening. Apologies for some of the technical difficulties. I was going to say we're getting better at this, but that's an aspiration. We're going to be getting better at this. We'll be eliminating technical difficulties as we go. Everybody, please do stay safe out there. Follow all the guidelines in terms of social distancing, washing your hands, sneezing into your elbow, etc. That kind of stuff is really important. Obviously, we're seeing, very horrifying numbers now in terms of the number of people tragically dying from it, the number of people who are now testing positive on a daily basis. So it's really important that everybody does everything they can, and we think a socialist line of argument saying public health before private profit is absolutely a key part of doing that, and we can see workers in Ireland and around the world on the front line. If there's questions we haven't answered, which I'm sure there are, you can message us. We'll be getting back to you. You can also ring the number that Eddie gave. Okay, thanks very much. We'll probably be back next week.
Bye-bye.